Hi guys, welcome to the show again, the Universe of Memories, where we talk to guests from throughout the history of Doctor Who, and talk to them about Doctor Who and also other things they do as what they've done as well. And so I'm really, really delighted that I've got a guest here who is a musician and composer on Doctor Who and many other things he's done too. So I'd like to welcome, please, Dominic Glynn. How are you, Dominic?
Oh, I'm good, thanks, Frank, and really, really nice to be asked to come and do this. So yeah, good to meet you and good to have a chat.
Thank you very much. Right, my first question is, because I'm fascinated to know these sort of things, um, what was the first record you bought?
Okay, so the first record I bought was it was an album of TV themes, and it was although I hadn't quite realised it when I bought it, I just thought it said the Avengers on it. I thought, oh, it's the theme from the Avengers, which I loved as a kid. But when I got it home, it was actually the theme from the Avengers and other TV themes and films played on harmonica. And it was called something like I can't remember what the album was called, but it was by Jerry Murad and the Harmonicats, which sounds pretty darn cool as far as
Yeah,
I'm
it does.
concerned.
Yeah.
So if you can imagine a harmonica version of the theme from the Avengers and many other, you know, thriller TV series and films of the 50s and 60s and 70s. Well, it wasn't 70s, no, this was earlier. This is 60s. So I would have been about 7 or something when I bought this thing. So, and recently I went and bought a copy. I found it online. I thought I must get a copy of this record, the first record I ever bought. And I found it somewhere on eBay. And so I've got a copy. It's great.
I remember they did a thing as well. There was a thing they used to do. I don't think it's so much now, but back in the day, I remember a lot of these albums used to come out. I think they were on like Pickwick or something, the Pickwick label or something,
Yeah.
and it would be a reimagining of TV themes, and that sort of thing,
Mm.
but played by the Jeff Last Orchestra or something,
Yes. Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
they were pretty bad, some of them,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
They would do a theme like Blake Seven, and it just no, it didn't work.
I mean, they were particularly bad when they tried to do Doctor Who because
Yeah,
obviously Doctor Who, it's electronic,
yeah,
and it
yeah,
certainly
very much
was.
so.
Yeah.
Um, Dominic, did you study music or were you self-taught?
No, I was self-taught. I mean, we had music lessons at school. Well, I had a brilliant music teacher, but I never actually was taught an instrument apart from a brief period where I played the violin when I was about 11, and it was a dreadful row. And I was, I decided not to pursue that line. So no, I'm self-taught. I just happened to, we had a piano at home, and I just taught myself how to play. My mum was a piano teacher, so she used to give me very basic this is middle C and this is how to play C major, or she gave me very basics. And yeah, I just plonked around on the piano, and then friends and I started a band. So I was keyboard player because we had a piano, so that's how I became the keyboard player, and it just went from there really. But no formal training at all.
Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah. Um, the gigs how long were you gigging for, sort of with bands before you sort of went off and did sort of solo recording uh stuff?
Well, quite a long time. So we started the band at school um, when would have been about 16, 17. And I say the band, it sort of went through various incarnations, but a band began when I was about 16. And I started working on Doctor Who, which was my first professional job, when I was 25. So it was about 9 years of, you know, being in a band, doing gigs, small local gigs or London gigs, mostly. And I was, at school, obviously, to start with, but then working. So I was working to fund my music habit. And yeah, then eventually I was able to go pro with it. As I say, when I was about 25. Excuse me, my phone is going off.
Well,
Yes, ignore it.
yeah. So, were there any sort of funny sort of memories you have of gigging? Were there any sort of weird incidents happened or any kind of funny things that happened at first?
Many,
Yeah.
but trying to bring them to mind. We were sort of gigging around the time of the the riots in the early 80s. So I remember we were often sort of on alert as we'd be doing a gig in Brixton or something and worrying that we were going to get firebombed or something, but we never did. But it was quite, I do remember it was quite a sort of difficult time for a while. The tensions were high. It was kind of, as I say, around the early 80s, difficult period, but we had an awful lot of fun as well. It was great fun. For a while, it was a four-piece band, and then after a while, people gradually dropped off one at a time and ended up with just being two of us. And we ended up both being keyboard players. And so we were kind of in at the right time for the early 80s synth pop thing that happened.
So your first commission, professional commission, would have been Doctor Who. Is that right?
It was my first proper
Yeah.
professional thing. I mean, I did a little bit of corporate video work, just literally in my spare time. So I had a friend who worked for the pest control company, Rent-A-Kill, and they had a video department that made films about their various activities. And I was asked through the friend to produce a score to a short film or a couple of short films, one of which was about how they get rid of pests. Obviously, that's what they do, how they get rid of pigeons. And it was the film that I did for Rent-A-Kill of exterminating pigeons that it was one of the things I sent off to the producer of Doctor Who in 1985 or 84, I think, when I sent it off. I was about 23 then. And that was one of the demos I sent to him to get the job that ended up being my actual job for a while, which was Doctor Who.
Were you a fan of Doctor Who before you worked on it? Did you follow it at all?
I did, absolutely. I don't think I ever classed myself as a fan because I discovered what fans were, very, very into Doctor Who, and I never, I couldn't have told you the title of every story and what happened in each. What I consider to be real fans know everything that happened in every episode. But having said that, I think I watched it continuously since I was about 7. Probably dipped off a bit at a point while Tom Baker was Doctor Who, simply because of my age at the time and I was going out doing other things. But I pretty much watched the whole lot from start, and I still do, and I love it. So, and as a child, it was my favorite show, and I used to draw pictures from Doctor Who, make little Doctor Who comics, and write stories and all that stuff. So, yeah. Although when I went for the interview, for want of a better word, to do the job, John Nathan Turner, who was the producer at the time, did ask me if I was a fan. And at the time, there was quite a lot of, it was quite a big problem with fans and John Nathan Turner. There was quite a lot of tension. And so I didn't really know how to answer that. So I said, well, yeah, sort of a fan. Yeah, I said, not a fan, but I'm a fan. Subtle difference in intonation there, which you seem to appreciate. So.
Yeah. So getting the gig to do the not only to do incidental music for several stories, but the big one being doing the iconic theme, opening and
Mhm,
closing theme.
mhm.
Um, what were there any set of instructions by anyone in the production team as to what they were trying to do with the reimagining of the music, or were you pretty much left on your own to realize it?
I was fairly left on my own, and I have recounted the story a few times to people about how the only instruction I had from John Nathan Turner, who was really the only person I dealt with on the theme, was, could you see if you could do a disco version of it? And I really didn't want to do that because I just thought, particularly at that time, disco didn't have for me, it wasn't what I thought of when I thought of Doctor Who. I still thought of the Bee Gees, and I thought, I don't want the Bee Gees doing the Doctor Who theme. So I sort of said, "Oh, I'll give it a go. I'll try it or something." And I tried it, and I didn't like it. So I told him, "I don't think that's going to work, John." And he was fine. He said, "Okay, well, never mind. Just do what you can do." and I think the idea was he just wanted to refresh it and do something that was different. And so that was I just took it upon myself to do it the way I did it. Fortunately, he liked it. So and I, as I often say to people, I had to find a different way of doing it from Peter Howell, who'd done the previous version, because I didn't have anything like the equipment that they had at the Radiophonic Workshop. So I was working as a solo independent freelancer out of the spare room in my house with just a couple of keyboards, and I didn't have the resources, so I had to kind of almost scale it down rather than doing a very epic, highly produced thing. I almost went lo-fi with it, which was one way of going, and it was a different way of doing it. And I up to a point it worked. I think I would have liked to have had a bit longer to work on it. And in hindsight, there are lots of things I would have done differently. But fortunately, I have been able to revisit it over the years and, update it and do it the way perhaps I would like to have done it had I had the chance.
During that Trial of a Time Lord season, which of course your music, your opening that was for that season only. Your theme. But you did work on uh, uh, the incidental scores on a couple of those stories
Mhm.
in that season. And one of the first was the first four parts that went out. Um, they didn't have individual titles on screen, but I think that was the kind of thing that was umbrella thing, wasn't it, later on? But it was called The Mysterious Planet. Um,
Yeah, it
uh,
was in
uh,
it was in my script actually. The
oh,
script's
was
called
it?
Mysterious
Ah,
Planet. Yeah,
yeah, because I remember on the screen it would just say part one, two, three,
yeah.
whatever it might be.
Hmm.
Um, but that opening sequence, Dominic, for that story, which sets up the events, of the trial. Um, and you've got that space station. I think that's the correct
Hmm.
term for it. Quite clever motion kind of, cameras going on and stuff like
Mm.
that. It did look quite ambitious for the budget, I think.
Mm.
Um, but your music works so well in sync with it. So again, going back to, I'll probably go back to this a few times, repeat myself, but again, were you briefed as to what kind of music they wanted for that sequence
I,
and the
I
story itself?
I don't think they knew what they wanted for it. What happened was the script from that first scene. John Nathan Turner sent me that script before they shot it, and said, really, as a final demo for whether or not he was going to offer me the job to work on the show, he said, "Could you just write something for this scene, and we'll take it from there." So I wrote that from the script. Um, and it was all based on the words on the page, basically. So it was a beautiful piece of writing from Robert Holmes, and I was just using the inspiration from what I read, um, and yeah, John liked it immediately. And so when they actually did the model shot and I saw it, I was blown away because I thought it looked incredible. They'd never done anything that looked that good on Doctor Who before, and I was lucky enough to get the job writing the music to accompany it. um, I had to re-record it from the version I'd done as a demo because the demo version, I didn't know how long the sequence was going to be. I just had to write a piece of music and imagine how long it might last. But yeah, no guidance on how to do it. Just do what I do and see if they like it. Unfortunately, they did.
What's the idea that you had for it? Because it's quite a big it looks quite big scale,
Yeah,
um, uh, that opening. Were you trying to go for a kind of like within the resources that you had to hand, um, going for quite a thematic kind of
yeah,
sound, a sort of big sound?
yeah. I mean, what I wanted to do with my work on Doctor Who, I wanted to sort of scale it up musically a bit because I had felt that for a while Doctor Who had sounded a bit TV, as you might say, in a quite small scale. And so, as you say, within the limitations that we had for equipment wise, I wanted to try and make it a little bit more cinematic. So, with that opening sequence, I was very lucky because there was no dialogue over it, which gave me the opportunity to almost let rip with the music for 30 seconds or something. So yeah, my inspiration, as I say, came from the script. There's a description of it being cathedral like, the space station. So I immediately thought of a cathedral bell tolling. So that forms the rhythm of the piece right from the off. And then I wanted to try and make it a combination of synthetic and semi-orchestral sounds to try and create that cinematic feel. So that was the inspiration, really. As I say, trying to A, be cinematic, and B, follow the description on the page, which was beautifully written.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Holmes at that time, I think, was coming to the end of his association with Doctor Who. He wasn't very well, I don't think.
No.
And so much so that I think the last two episodes that you worked on in the trial, The Ultimate Foe, the last two parter thing, I don't think he finished those scripts, did he?
Well, sadly, he died before he'd.
He died. Yeah,
It
yeah,
wasn't just his association with Doctor Who; it was the end of his life.
yeah.
Sadly, so he wrote episode 13, which I think is my favourite actually, and then he died before episode 14 had been written. So, for anybody who doesn't know the story, it was a very troubled production that season of Doctor Who. And episode 14 was written by the script editor at the time, Eric Saywood. But then there was this dispute between him and John Nathan Turner, the producer, and the script editor, Eric Saywood, withdrew that final episode script. So they had to get Pip and Jane Baker in at the very last minute to write a completely fresh episode 14 without having read episode 13. They had a stipulation, or having read, no, they could have read 13, but they weren't allowed to read what had been written for episode 14. So they were almost working in the dark, which is why it's a bit of an odd episode 14. But it was done in an incredible rush to get it finished, and they concluded it, and it kind of just about held together in the end. But yes, sadly, it never got to be the final Robert Holmes script as it should have been.
I mean, it's no denying his legacy in Doctor Who, Robert Holmes. I mean, he wrote so many classic stories. He was very good at doing characterization.
Mm,
Very good at doing a lot of double acts as well. And
mm,
there's no exception here. You've got Glitz and Dibber,
yeah.
who are very classic Holmes kind of double acts.
Mm, mm.
That's kind of a thing he's very good at.
Yeah, and I feel
Um,
quite honoured to have worked on one of his stories.
oh yeah,
Five of his episodes.
that's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, um, Now you went, yeah. Oh, the other thing I want to mention about that last the two episodes of the trial, um, the scenes in the with the fantasy factory, the um, with all that kind of, I don't know if I got the right description for it. You'll be able to tell me, Dominic, but it was like carnival kind of
That
music,
was the
and
idea. Yeah, yeah. That was
yeah,
the idea. Fairground carnival.
yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Mm.
but sort of like a dark carnival.
Yeah,
That was where I was, heading with that. Yeah,
yeah. Did you have fun realizing that? How did you
very
do you
much so.
remember how you
Yeah,
kind of achieved that? Do you remember what sort of things
just
you were
the
using?
usual thing. Listening to other source material of what does carnival music sound like. Listening to things. Some of it's in your head anyway. You kind of know back of your mind. You know what you expect to hear. It's like a merry-go-round. There's that kind of oh, I can't even think of the name now, but it's a very distinctive sound that I just knew I had to try and recreate it. Um, and yeah, the visuals were actually really good for the Fantasy Factory. That big light that says Fantasy Factory, flashing lights and everything, it just looked great. It just kind of, I think the music kind of wrote itself almost at that point because it looked so good. It was quite inspiring to do, and I love that episode, particularly episode 13, because it's so weird. I like all the stuff to do with the Matrix and mixing up reality and the dreamlike sort of sequences. Um, that's the sort of Doctor Who I love actually. So
Yeah, I enjoyed that when they entered that, and again, it was all this sort of Dickensian.
Yeah.
thing going on
Hmm.
world. It was really very very well realized. The sets were really good. I thought it was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and some great actors acting in it too.
Mm.
Performances in it and so on. Um, Now you went on to do also one of the characters that that were in that story came back for the next one you did, Dragonfire.
Hmm.
But now we've got a new doctor, of course, Sylvester now instead of he's taken over from Colin Baker.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the the setting of it, Dominic, Ice World.
Hmm.
Again, how did you kind of approach that to get that kind of feeling of a nice world, basically that cold kind of
Well,
atmosphere to it and stuff?
I had discussions with Chris Clough, who was the director, and we spoke quite a bit beforehand. And he just said something like, "Can you make the music as cold as you can?" um, we were trying to create this icy atmosphere. So I just sort of set about in my head thinking about cold sounds, and that made me think of like icicles and um, ice. Um, and I ended up sort of as the basis of a lot of the sound. I recorded a child's like those roll along toys, with like a wheel on it. You put it along, and it's got little bells in it. As you wheel it along, ding, 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 ding. I sampled that and slowed it down, and then you got this sort of like, you know, eerie kind of bell-like but very high little bell sound, which sounds quite icy. And I thought, yeah, that works quite well. So I incorporated that into a lot of the music. This is sort of one of the layers of the music, um, and just sort of glacial type sounds. It's very difficult to put into words how you achieve that. It's just kind of getting a feel for what cold sounds are as opposed to warm sounds. It's almost like I don't know. Okay, it's difficult to put it into words, but you kind of instinctively, I think, hopefully, when you hear a warm sound, where you hear a cold sound. So we just aimed to go in that kind of direction without overdoing it. Um, but again, it looked quite cold as well. So follow your nose.
Um, the what was I going to say? You came back again, of course, for the Happiness Patrol, and I know, and it's interesting that story because um, I mean, there's no denying that it had political undercurrents in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps some of it was quite on the nose, perhaps some of it was quite subtle, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But over the years, I think that story, I think, has had a reevaluation almost decades on, like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things do. They 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 slip the net, as it were, when they're first
Mm-hmm.
transmitted. And because it was dressed up with a lot of characters that had heavy makeup on, bright pink, this, that, and the other, the message underneath was could be lost a bit
Yeah.
because of the appearances and so on. But I think when I was looking at it recently, um, I think that, and I could be wrong about this. I'm probably looking too deeply into this, Dominic, but I was thinking of the because everyone had to be happy. That was the premise. And if you weren't, you were disposed of pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
But the makeup that they had, which is so over the top and white and almost clown-like, could be also a way of looking at it that it was underneath that makeup they were hiding something. It was a
Yeah, this sort
facade.
of sad clown type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So it works on that kind of level too.
yeah.
If you just peel away a little bit, the real
There's
truth is underneath. It's
there's
not
quite a lot
all
of
harmonious, you know?
quite a lot of imagery, allegory, and all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff in the script. And I have to say, a couple of weekends ago, I went to a screening of the new special edition of the Happiness Patrol, which, if anybody doesn't know, it's coming out on Blu-ray. And what they've done is they've done a new version with extra digital visuals added to it. So it's been messed about with basically, because I think one of the things we a lot of us agreed was that it was a fantastic script, brilliantly put together, but with not enough budget at the time. It was done without enough money. They really needed to spend more money on it. And what they've done, in effect, is done what they would have liked to have done to it in those days. The other thing is it was edited a lot in 1988 just because the scripts were a bit too long. They had to cut out quite a lot. So what the new version has done is they've put in all the bits they shot, but they didn't have time to have in the final edit. And it's so much better, I have to say. I always liked it anyway, but I honestly think that the new version, it looks amazing, and it's very funny. There are a lot of bits when things get edited because they haven't got enough time. Invariably, the stuff that gets cut out is the character stuff, the comedy stuff, because you've got to get the plot through. That's what's got to be in there. So a lot of stuff was just on the cutting room floor, sadly. But they put that back in. So it's about 10 minutes. I think about 10 minutes back in the whole story. And as I say, these new visual, not just visual effects, not just new like explosions or whatever, but they've actually added new horizons and perspectives and everything. So it no longer looks studio bound. It kind of looks like you're out in the world with a sky and as I say, skyscrapers and neon signs that flash and all. It just looks fantastic. So anybody who hasn't ordered the Blu-ray, do, because it's worth it. It's worth it to see that.
I saw a trailer for it,
Yeah,
and they did show a few clips of the what they'd added, the,
yeah,
the the
yeah.
skylines and all that sort of thing
Mm-hmm.
to give it more vastness.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. They did suffer terribly with the budget on that one. No matter how well they they tried, it did look like a studio set.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Yeah,
supposed to be outside, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah,
Literally, the
yeah,
buildings they were outside at night,
yeah,
and there was meant to be a sky above and all that, but
yeah,
they just couldn't do
yeah.
it.
Well, it's there
Shame.
now. It's there
But
now.
it's there now, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And from what I did see, it looked really impressive.
yeah. It
It
does. It
reminded
does.
me with all the sort of neon signs that were flashing and the these sort of news bulletin things like on screens. It reminded me of the world of Blade Runner.
Very much so, and they've
Yeah,
they've clearly taken inspiration from that.
very much. Yeah.
Um, but it just and it's such an original story. It's so different. Just for clever and fantastic cast and everything. So
Oh, it was. It really
yeah,
did. It all kind of fell into place, really.
yeah.
But
And I
again,
was.
it seems to always be in hindsight that you kind of pick up on subtleties that were in it
Mm-hmm,
that you missed. It's like a lot of things, really.
mm-hmm,
And now I look at it, actually, I actually enjoy it an awful lot more now. I'm
mm.
more
I
every time I view it.
So many people say that,
Yeah.
and I was incredibly lucky to get that as a story because the music was so important in the story. It was integral to the story. So one of the lead characters played the harmonica. So this was the thing, we had to write this music. There had to be a contrast in the story between bland lift music that was pumped through the speakers, and we had to make it as bland, as dull as possible, and then to have the music that was from the soul, from the heart, which was the blues. And this is where the harmonica came in. And I had a brilliant harmonica player called Adam Burney. He played the harmonica for me because the actor wasn't a great harmonica player, so he had to pretend to play, and then we had to add on the harmonica afterwards. But Adam did a fantastic job, and yeah, he's really brings the soul to it, which is what it needed.
Did you record together in the same room
The
doing that?
harmonica, yeah.
Yeah.
So I initially I wrote the harmonica parts, and I actually went to the actor's place to get him to learn the parts, and then I was going to then integrate them into the incidental music. But as I say, unfortunately, it wasn't to be, because really couldn't achieve the result I wanted out of the harmonica. So that's why I then got Adam to come and play. And yes, he played in my studio. I can't remember because it was how many years ago was this? 1988. So I think I must have got into play to a click track. I'm trying to remember whether or not he was playing to the rhythm or whether or not I just got into play cold and then I added the parts on. Can't remember actually the process of it. Um, Probably a combination of the two actually. But yes, he was certainly with me, and I recorded him in my studio.
Um, it was very effective with that harmonica. It really was. Never more so than that final scene with Sheila Hancock and the death of her beloved
Fifi,
pet Fifi.
yeah.
Now that could have gone into the ridiculous. There's a fine line with that kind of thing. You've got a puppet there, for all intents and purposes, and she's crying over it. But with very good acting from Sheila and Sylvester, he really ups the
Mm,
mark on that too in that
mm,
scene.
mm-hmm,
Um, his very poignant line at the end when she's crying over Fifi, and suddenly you realize she does have emotions.
mm,
And Sophie says something to Sylvester. I can't remember the exact line, but um, what should we do? You know, about this or whatever. And he just says two words, "'Tis done."
mm,
And
mm.
then the camera pulls up like that away.
Yeah.
That was absolutely beautiful, that scene.
I've had,
And the
I
music
can't tell
with
you
it, you know?
how many
Yeah.
people have come up to me and said the only time they've ever actually cried in Doctor Who is in the scene where the puppet dies, as they put it. Because on the one hand, like you say, it could not work. There were, in some ways it might not work at all. But Sheila was absolutely fantastic with her performance, and Adam was brilliant with his. He makes the harmonica cry. This is the thing, to be able to get that expression out of an instrument. That's kind of what really helps to make that scene work. And I sort of take it as a compliment that people have said they cry at that scene. I can't say that we set out to do that, but it's nice that people got the emotion that we were trying to get across there. And it was also fantastic. The other thing about the thing was to get the opportunity to write music where you don't put those two things together normally. You don't normally have electronic music with blues harmonica. That's something you have to. There has to be a special reason for doing that. And for me, it was a dream to be able to get that opportunity to do something like that.
And it worked really well.
Thank you.
Something that you wouldn't think would work
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
It was very mix of styles worked really well. Um, you again did this kind of thing where you had a session musician, I believe, unless you did it, Tommy, you can tell me. But when you came back and did Survival, you
Mm.
had quite a bit of guitar work on there.
Mm.
Was that a session guitarist that came
It
in?
was a session guitarist. Yeah, came in. That came about after discussion with the director, Alan Waring, on that one, and he really wanted, particularly the stuff on the alien planet. He wanted to kind of have a almost like a symphonic rock feel to it, and he played me some Dire Straits. Said something, could you do something like this? And I thought, well, yeah, I can, but I can't do it without a guitar, and I don't play the guitar. I said, I'll get somebody in. And he said, yeah, get somebody in. So one session player came in, guitar, guy that I'd worked with before, and did the initially the electric guitar, and then I thought, actually, if I've got an electric guitar, I could probably work quite nicely with an acoustic guitar in the sequences where the horseback riding and all that kind of stuff kind of created that spaghetti western feel. But again, all the time combining it with the electronics, which is how I created my scores. It was done with samples and synthesizers and everything. So I kind of quite like the idea of mixing those two things together, using a guitar or harmonica or whatever it is to be a key element in the score, but it's still an electronic score at the end of the day.
On average, I know stories productions can vary, but on average, Dominic, how long would you be given to score? What would be the timeline that you had to score a story?
We usually
If
had
you just give
about
a small example or whatever,
Yeah, we
Yeah.
usually had, it wasn't fixed in stone, but it was usually about a week to 10 days per episode. I don't remember if it was ever less than a week, but I'd say a week to 10 days was about the average. And obviously, you're doing three episodes or four episodes, depending on the story. and you generally would do one at a time. So you'd probably so what the process for me was, we used to go to the radiophonic workshop, which, although I wasn't working out of the radiophonic workshop, we always used to use that as the base from which to look at the finished edit. Um, Mostly because Dick Mills, who did all the special sound, he was still working out of the radiophonic workshop. So it was a kind of central place to go and meet. They had a viewing, room that we could view it in. And so we'd go through the episode, we'd make notes about where we thought there should be music and where there should be sound. I say we, it would be three of us. It would be me, Dick Mills, and the director. So the three of us initially would watch it, make notes. The director would normally say, "Oh, like music here, come out at this point, and then should come back in here when this happens." And then we'd sort of talk it through and say, "Well, I don't know, I don't think you need it there." And they go, "Yeah, okay, fine, yeah." So we'd have that debate, and then at the end of the day, I'd go home with a VHS tape with that episode on it, with time code burnt into the bottom of the screen, and I just work from that at home, and I'd record it on my home system. And about a week or 10 days later, the director would come to my studio. I'd sit down and premiere it for him, and he'd sit back, and I'd be nervously going, "Oh, he likes it," And yeah, that was how it worked. Luckily, they normally did like it. I didn't really have a big problem with directors not liking what I'd done, but always a bit nerve wracking. And then the second nerve wracking bit was after I've had the director's approval, and then we go and do the sound mix at the end of the day, at the end of the like the post production part of the program. You then have the producers run, so that would be at BBC Television Centre, and then that would be the next nervous bit. And we're all thinking, then I hope he likes it. So the director's thinking, I hope he likes it. I'm thinking, I hope he likes it. And the sound guys are all thinking, I hope he likes the sound mix and all that stuff. So yeah, those were the processes that we went through.
So after Doctor Who, Dominic, what did you, can you remember what you did next? What sort of work were you going into then after that?
So after Doctor Who, well, during Doctor Who and post Doctor Who, I began doing other odds and sods for TV. I did lot of schools programs for a start. That was a lot of the things I was doing, and I've done odd bits of documentaries, etc., etc. But the biggest part of my working life has been doing library music, which, for people who don't know what library music is, it's a huge amount of the music that you hear on TV and film is not specifically written for that program or film. It's a catalogue of music that has been previously written, and it's made available for use by editors and directors and producers and everything. So it's pre-written music. So I get commissioned to write music for whatever project the publishers have in mind at that time. And it'll be, I'd get a brief, and it'll be something like, we're doing an album of music for sport, or we're doing an album of music for Scandi Noir, or children's comedy. It could be literally anything, and the music could be literally anything. It could be hip hop, it could be techno, it could be string quartet, opera, whoever. And it helps if you're versatile and you can turn your hand to a bit of anything. Fortunately, that's the sort of thing I've made a career out of doing in my music career. So yeah, so that's been the biggest thing. And then I do commissions here and there for TV or film as they come along. But the library music has been a continuous thing that's happened literally since 1989, kind of crossing over when Doctor Who ended.
Tell us about the projects you've done in recent years, Dominic, where you've revisited some of the scores from your Doctor Who work and done the sort of remixes.
Yeah.
Can you tell us how that idea came about, and what you've done with them?
Yeah. So there was another thing that happened after Doctor Who ended, and now I've also got heavily involved in making dance music, techno, and more to the left field of techno rather than very commercial stuff. So particularly in the 90s and the early 2000s, I was writing for some underground London dance labels, and I set up my own dance label and all sort of things. So that was a big part of my life as well, dance music, techno. And lots of people I knew were DJs and producers who were often asking if they could they have the tapes of my music for Doctor Who because they wanted to sample them to make tracks out of. And I remember thinking, I always turned everybody down because I remember thinking, oh, I think I might want to do that at some point. And I just sort of like didn't ever give anyone the tapes. And then what happened was I was doing a convention in LA, the Gallifrey One convention in, I can't think it was 2014. And I remember thinking, what can I do that's different for the convention? As a composer, I need to sort of present something that's different because I'm not an actor. I haven't got loads of funny stories. Um, I will do a little remix of my Doctor Who theme, and I, perform it at the or play it live at the convention. I had my computer. I didn't play it live. I was just playing the mix live, and that became the Gallifrey mix of the Doctor Who theme. And everybody seemed to really love it and said, "Oh, where can I buy it?" And I said, "Well, you can't buy it. I've just done it for today." That was, but people kept saying, "Oh, I wish we could get it." And I went home and thought, well, maybe I'll do a few and we'll make an EP out of it. So then I made 4 versions and produced it as an EP and made it available online. Again, it went very well. People really liked it, and then I followed that up with subsequent EPs of remixes of the music I'd done incidental music for the show. And yeah, we're up to 4 separate mini albums or EPs now. And they've all been well received as far as I can see. And I've done them live again at conventions. Nowadays, I'm often DJing them at conventions. So I'll be going to Chicago TARDIS the end of November, beginning of December. Going to do a DJ set of all the remixes then, working with a visual VJ doing visuals on screen as well. So yeah, so that's been something that's kept the Doctor Who thing going for me as well, which has been nice.
That's brilliant. Yeah. I hope that goes well for you, Dominic, over in
Thank you.
Chicago TARDIS. I'm
Thanks.
sure that the audience will really enjoy that. You know,
Fingers crossed.
um, it's a nice touch to do something like that. Um, um, so just to wrap this up now with you, Dominic,
Mm-hmm.
are you what are you currently doing? What is there any projects at the moment you can speak about that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently working on something again, Doctor Who related. So I'm working on a film documentary called Indoctrinated, which is a documentary about Doctor Who fans. And it is being produced by some Doctor Who fans, but it's specifically about 3 American Doctor Who fans whose lives have been shaped by their love of Doctor Who. So something, either their career or something else that they've done, volunteer work or whatever, has all been inspired by their devotion to Doctor Who, basically. So I'm doing the incidental score for that, which again, all being well, we're going to premiere at Chicago TARDIS at the end of November, so beginning of December. So yeah, that's what I'm currently working on, plus a few other projects that are always going on in the background as well. So it's quite a few things going on, but yeah, keeping busy.
Yeah, yeah, fascinating projects that you're doing there, keeping your hand in with still within the Doctor Who world. You still
Mm-hmm.
come back to that in a way,
Mm.
I think once you're in it, you're in it for the
It's a
long haul,
it's a
pretty
big
much, aren't
cliche,
you?
big cliche they say, but it is a bit of a family. The Doctor Who
It is
thing,
true, I think. Yeah.
it's been
Um,
lovely to be involved in something and to feel as though all the even people who I grew up watching, when I was 7 or 8, now become friends and that's wonderful, wonderful thing to be with. It's not just the people that you happen to work with at the time.
yeah.
For me, it was the late 80s, but I've now become friends with people who were on the show in the 60s and the 70s,
Yeah.
the 2000s, the 2010s, all that kind of thing.
Uh,
It's great.
that's lovely,
Mm.
Dominic. Lovely. Well, um, I want to say to you, Dominic, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a blast talking to you.
Oh,
I
thanks,
really
Frank. Well, it's
appreciate
been
it.
great talking to you, and I really appreciate you asking me. It's been great fun.
It's been awesome. And guys, thank you so much for watching too. And we'll be back with another Universe of Memories very soon. So I hope you'll join me for that. And until then, take care and bye bye.